Where we went in, the Russian servicemen just ran away. They didn't know how to fight. There are two kinds of Russian soldiers: those who are already in coffins and those who soon will be. We just shot them, I don't know, like a herd of sheep.
The Russian world is Bucha, it's Konkala, it's Grozny, it's Mariupol.
Yes, they wanted to take Grozny in 2 hours. They said Kyiv in 3 days. Throwing meat at it won't work.
I will never forgive Russia, never.
I lived in Norway for the last 15 years, had a family, and lived my quiet, peaceful life. I also had my own logistics firm, which brought me a good income. As they say, there were no signs of trouble. From the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, literally a week later, I was already in Kyiv, and I joined the battalion, the Sheikh Mansour Chechen battalion.
In 2022, on February 24th, we had an event planned for the night of the 24th to the 25th, dedicated to the deportation of the Chechen and Ingush peoples. The entire State Committee for Deoccupation and our government that works abroad, our government in exile as it's sometimes called, were in full attendance. We had a meeting and we made a decision that we would start forming battalions to support the Ukrainians in this war.
When Bucha happened, that had a very, very big effect on me. It affected me to the depths of my very soul. I remembered Samashki. I remembered the massacre. I remembered it all. These were the moments that I just couldn't let go of. I have a large family, children, I lived quietly. No one was forcing me to go anywhere. But this moment, I just couldn't stand it. As soon as it all began, the second campaign in 2022, I made it my goal to get to Ukraine by any means possible.
The Samashki massacre involved the mass murder of Chechen civilians by Russian forces in April 1995 during the First Chechen War. Between April 7th and 8th, 1995, forces from the Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs carried out an operation to mop up or cleanse the village of Samashki in the Achkoy-Martin district of Chechnya of rebel fighters. An independent mission to Samashki by Russian human rights NGOs, including the Memorial Human Rights Center, was able to confirm the deaths of 103 villagers, including 13 women and girls and 20 men over the age of 60. The youngest of the casualties was 15 years old. Up to half of the victims did not die as a result of indiscriminate fire. Russian forces killed them intentionally. A report from Human Rights Watch in May 1995 said, the worst single case of misconduct to date by Russian forces is the massacre in the village of Samashki on April 7th and 8th, 1995. Official Russian sources estimate that at least 120 people died in the attack. Memorial representatives and independent journalists have reported credibly that Russian soldiers wantonly attacked civilians in civilian dwellings by throwing hand grenades into cellars where civilians were hiding, burning houses with flamethrowers, and summarily shooting civilians.
It was probably a flashback to before the Russian invasion of Ichkeria. Same Putin, same army, and same concept of warfare, same terrorist methods. Killing, bombing. Nothing has changed. The enemy is the same. Only the geography of the war has shifted.
Бандиты такого рода, чем они лучше, чем нацистские преступники? Ваши отцы, деды и прадеды не для того сражались с нацистами, защищая нашу общую родину, чтобы сегодняшние неонацисты захватили власть на Украине. Мы освобождаем чеченский народ от этой заразы и исходим из того, что мы обязаны это сделать в интересах самого чеченского народа и других народов Российской Федерации. И для этого мы будем стремиться к демилитаризации и денацификации Украины, а также преданию суду тех, кто совершил многочисленные кровавые преступления против мирных жителей, в том числе и граждан Российской Федерации. Своими действиями террористы вынудили нас к такого рода развороту событий. Наши действия — это самозащита от создаваемых нам угроз.
Как я отношусь к Путину? Как можно относиться?
How do I feel about Putin? How can one feel about a person who ordered the rape,
Почему приказу были изнасилованы,
murder, torture,
заточены
and imprisonment of your fellow citizens?
в тюрьме твоих сограждан,
Your brothers and sisters? How can anyone view this person like the worst scum on earth? If I met Putin, what would I do? If you see a man, I don't know, a robber, a gangster, or a pedophile trying to commit his criminal acts, you would kill him. And I would do the same thing without hesitation. With great zeal, I would simply shoot him.
Putin, я бы сказал бы коротко и ясно, лицо России.
I would say Putin is the face of Russia. Russia can no longer exist without Putin, you see? It's in their blood now. They're used to living in this slave-like existence, to living in poverty, corruption, and bribery. I don't believe that if Putin dies, things will change in Russia. Nothing will ever change. Putin is Russia, and Russia is Putin. We have to understand that.
Back in 2022, Ukrainian soldiers came up to me and apologized for being influenced by Russian propaganda.
за то, что они были подвержены российской пропаганде, что они
For believing we Chechens were bad people, terrorists. But now their eyes have been opened to who their true brothers, friends, and who the real terrorists are.
Мы сейчас подъехали
We have now come close to the Russian border,
с России, в такое небольшое село.
to a small village where there was once fighting, and we are now launching grad rockets at the Russians.
В сторону русских. Наше подразделение
Our unit specializes in special operations.
на специальных операциях, это операции
These are operations behind enemy lines. These are actions of sabotage on the front line or behind the front line.
Мы заходили в Белгородскую.
We went into the Belgorod region. It was our unit that entered Russian territory and carried out sabotage operations there.
Куда заходили мы, оттуда просто российские военные.
Where we went in, the Russian servicemen just ran away. We heard that Ramzan Kadyrov's troops were there too. They disappeared without a trace.
Кстати, да, это танк Т-72, который был
By the way, this T-72 tank was destroyed at the beginning of the war near Kyiv.
Киевом. Ну, вот так вот приехали.
They came to Ukraine expecting to take Kyiv in 3 days.
3 дня стоит здесь. Как говорил
I think Aslan Maskadov once said,
на территории
There are two kinds of Russian soldiers in Ichkeria, those who are already in coffins and those who soon will be. There will be no other occupiers on Ukrainian soil either.
Я служу в иностранном легионе.
I serve in Ukraine's International Legion in military intelligence. Our battalion is the separate special purpose battalion.
И в основном
Mostly, we carry out assault missions.
штурмовые
We storm trenches, buildings, things like that.
штурмы окопов, зданий и тому подобное. Иногда едем поддержать ребят.
Sometimes we go out to support the guys. Holding positions and defenses, it all depends on the task at hand.
Задача это штурм.
But our main task is carrying out assaults.
Опыт против России.
As we have a lot of experience against Russia, and we have very experienced guys with us.
С 2014 года здесь находимся.
There are guys that have been here since 2014, as well as guys that I knew from when I was back in Chechnya. The main direction is Bakhmut, which is where I was first deployed. I didn't even get my papers in order, and I was already off to the front lines. At that time, we were based in Konstantinivka, and from there we went to Bakhmut. I was surprised at what their chief at the time, Prigozhin, kept saying, "Give me shells." I wondered, do they really not have enough shells?
У нас нехватка боеприпасов 70%! Шойгу! Герасимов! Где боеприпасы?
Там ни на секунду, ни на минуту.
The artillery fire didn't stop for a second, not even for a minute. Literally, not for a second, not for a minute. Every meter was shelled. It was literally raining down on us. Wagner rolled out a massive enlistment campaign. They were released from prisons and driven to the front line like cattle. They didn't know how to fight. We just shot them, I don't know, like a herd of sheep. But they just kept coming and coming. It didn't end, you know?
The Russians covered Bakhmut with bodies. I mean, they destroyed block by block and pelted it with human flesh. Meat assaults, yes. There were, by the way, they didn't do it only with convicts. They had paratroopers there. They were literally in a few apartment blocks, right close to our positions.
So at first they had, I guess maybe they had a surplus of people, I don't know, a very large number. They let a very large number of people in there. But still, they paid a very high price to take the city of Bakhmut. Believe me, a very high price.
Сегодня, пополудня в 12 часов, полностью был взят Бахмут.
I'm absolutely sure that this war that Putin unleashed, that Russia unleashed in 2014 against Ukraine, it was laid in advance, before these events, before Putin came to power. If you remember, and pay attention to the speech of our first president, Dzhokhar Dudayev, in '95, in an interview he gave.
Dzhokhar Dudayev, the first president of the unrecognized Chechen Republic of Ichkeria, led Chechnya against Russian forces during the First Chechen War. He was killed by a Russian missile strike in 1996.
В Крыму еще будет бойня. Украина еще схлестнется с Россией на непримиримых. Пока русизм существует, он никогда не откажется от своих амбиций.
He already had information about the sentiments within the Russian military leadership and imperialists, that they were preparing for the events they eventually executed under Putin in 2014. Today, we are used to war, casualties, and bombings. But in 1994, it was something unimaginable. Even with our history of deportation and genocide, we still weren't prepared for the brutal war that Russia would unleash.
В эфире новости российского телевидения. Канун Дня Российской Конституции отмечен двумя событиями. Улицы городов украшены национальными флагами, а в Чечню сегодня на рассвете введены войска. Сегодня рано утром 3 вооруженные колонны Министерства обороны и внутренних войск МВД России вошли на территорию Чечни из Ингушетии, Северной Осетии и Дагестана.
Imagine, there were carpet bombings in cities. This was the city of Grozny, with a population of over 500,000 people of different nationalities. And this city was being destroyed. I remember, very vividly, December 28th, the first bombing. I was the Minister of Culture then. On that day, Dzhokhar Dudayev invited us to a meeting. When I left, the city was already being bombed, and there were already battles on the outskirts of the city, on the outskirts of the Republic.
Предновогодние минуты – это время надежд. Нет человека, который бы не хотел, чтобы Новый год был бы лучше прошедшего, чтобы ему улыбнулись счастье и удача, чтобы в наших домах были покой и мир.
В новогоднюю ночь фактически произошло следующее. Российские части предприняли полномасштабный штурм центра Грозного. Мы пока не имеем полной информации о потерях сторон, но уже сейчас ясно, что прошедший день был днем самых ожесточенных, самых кровопролитных боев за все 3 недели войны.
They started with the maternity hospital in the city of Grozny. They bombed it deliberately. a maternity hospital with women in labor. Many who had not yet been born were classified as international terrorists and killed. Children who had just come into the world, 13 newborns were killed in that strike. Then, a targeted missile strike hit the market, where over 300 people were killed or wounded. All these horrors that the world is witnessing today, we, the Chechens, have experienced them ourselves. On the square, volunteer units were being formed to join the People's Militia. There, I joined the ranks with other Chechens who had come to enlist in the militia. I became one of the members of the People's Militia. Everything Ukraine is experiencing today, starting with Bucha and Irpin, it's the same as what happened in Samashki and Novye Aldi.
As per a Human Rights Watch report in June 2000, on February 5, 2000, Russian forces summarily executed at least 60 civilians in Novye Aldi and Chernorechi, suburbs of Grozny, the capital of Chechnya. The massacre, which amounts to a war crime, took place in the midst of a sweep operation several days after Russian forces seized Grozny. According to a report by the Memorial NGO, a total of 56 people were confirmed killed, while Human Rights Watch reported the number as 60. The victims included 5 members of the Estamirov family, including 29-year-old Toita Estamirova, who was 8 months pregnant, and her 1-year-old son, Kasan Estamirov. The guilt of the Russian state in the Aldi murders and the denial of justice to the victims was formally established in 2 separate judgments by the European Court of Human Rights in 2006 and 2007.
It was in '95. The village of Samashki was surrounded by Russian federal troops. They surrounded Samashki and drove in their most ruthless punitive units. They simply slaughtered everyone in their path, storming houses, cutting open the bellies of pregnant women, killing children, and burning houses with elderly people inside.
До 7 апреля этого кладбища не было. Российская сторона настаивает на том, что в селе оставались боевики.
Да, в 2000 году.
Yes, in 2000, in February, the Russian occupiers carried out a similarly cynical, punitive terrorist operation in the village of Novye Aldi, where they killed, buried, burned alive more than 100 civilians, women, children, and old people. If you compare Bucha to Aldi, it would probably be more accurate to compare the massacre to the entire territory of Chechnya, because this happened throughout our entire land. Unfortunately, we didn't have foreign journalists back then, or technology didn't allow us to put it all out into the light at that time.
Everything they could, they did. They stole, they looted, just as they're looting here in Ukraine today. Many crimes that were hidden from people in society in Chechnya, they can't hide here in Ukraine. And we can safely say that what they did in Chechnya, they are doing here in Ukraine today.
Сегодня они творят здесь, в Украине.
Сволочь! Абсолютно террористический.
Their methods of waging war are terrorist in their entirety. They have not changed since the wars between Russia and Chechnya. Deliberately bombing children's hospitals, maternity wards, bus stations, train stations, with the goal of killing as many civilians as possible, to force society to agree to any terms, just for the sake of peace. At the start of the first Russian-Chechen War, they had the same tactic. Drive in columns of tanks, seize the city in 2 hours, install their puppet government. The same thing happened here in Kyiv, in Ukraine. They thought Grozny would be theirs in 2 hours, Kyiv in 3 days. But how much time has passed now? More than 2 years, and throwing meat at it won't work. When the first Russian-Chechen War began, I was 7 or 8 years old in 1994. I don't remember exactly. It was all interesting back then. I was under some sort of impression, probably because of watching movies. I don't know. But when a bomb hit our home, the one we lived in, that was when I realized the harsh reality. That war wasn't so exciting after all.
Man is such a creature. From an early age, he remembers moments of joy or deep sorrow very vividly. I remember the first planes flying over Grozny, the first bombings. Surface-to-surface missiles, bombing. For me, they were horrifying. As a child, I was filled with fear, my heart trembling. I saw women crying, my mother crying, holding me close, not knowing where to take me or how to save me. I remember how we sat in basements, just like Ukrainians are sitting in basements today, during every air raid, every bombing, especially at the start. The basements were packed, the metro stations were packed. It's the same picture, you see? The basements are packed. We sat there among women, children crying, women crying. And then the first casualties appeared, when people began burying their loved ones, when the Russians started surrounding villages and settlements. You see, these were hard times, and they can never be forgotten. It's something that remains in my heart forever. I will never forgive Russia, never.
It was terrifying when my parents, my mother, grandmother were crying, forcing everyone into the basement. You could see the fear in their eyes, and it rubbed off on you.
Мы не мы бандиты, а Россия бандиты. Мы не напали на Россию, а Россия напала на нас.
The Second Chechen War, I remember it most clearly as a 17 or 18-year-old young man holding an AK-74, grasping it tightly at that time, joining the militia that was in Chechnya. The first explosions, the first sorties, the first trenches, the first defense, Petropavlovsk, then Grozny, then Chatoy, and so on.
The first moment when I picked up a weapon, it was in the summer of 2004. Me personally, I hadn't seen combat. I had no training. I was taken along on an ambush near the outskirts of Grozny. We had 2 crews in cars that stopped near a wooded area. We were all in military uniforms. They gave me a weapon I had never used before. I knew how to take the safety off, load it and shoot, knew how to pull the trigger. It so happened, maybe just by luck, but we came across a Ural military truck with Russian soldiers. And began firing at it. I remember I pressed the trigger and didn't let go until I had no bullets left, until the magazine was empty. Well, it really felt like I had done something great with my life.
During the Second Chechen War, in the positional phase, I held a rifle. And there were many moments when we repelled assaults. There were also times when we launched attacks on the Russians, surprise attacks. Given that our numbers were very small, we set up ambushes, all kinds of ambushes. Later, when the phase shifted to guerrilla warfare, I mined roads. I personally planted mines on roads, blew them up. I did everything I could until I left Chechnya. I kept fighting until the end. Until the end.
What Russia did in the 2000s and the 90s, and still continues to do to us, we have not forgotten. Of course, we are driven by a sense of revenge too. A large number of Russian participants from the Second Russian Chechen War were killed in Ukraine, including pilots. These are people that had already been decorated or promoted. So the result, let's say, is very positive.
Результат, скажем, очень хороший.
Сейчас батальон приехал Мансура, будет града насыпать. Мы запустили 6 снарядов одних, они сейчас попали. Его сейчас перезарядили и еще 4 запускаем туда же. Там это на границе с Белгородской областью, прямо на границе. У них позиции минометные стоят, там 2 или 3 миномета у них. Мы сейчас туда насыпать будем.
The Chechens owe a debt to Ukraine, a debt that we have not forgotten and will never forget. This goes back to the First Chechen War. Ukraine was the first state to respond to our call, to the call of our first president, Zakayev. Without hesitation, they organized volunteer units, joined us, and fought alongside us in every possible way. Our wounded were treated here. Ukraine, we can say, had our back until the end of the First War. They were a reliable source of support, you know? And we'll never forget that. So this is our first duty, to fulfill our obligation to Ukraine. The second is to later liberate our lands, because we share a common enemy. Russia is also suffering greatly in this war in Ukraine. Many of their people are rotting in the fields, killed, many. And they are struggling today. Burned out equipment, dead soldiers, no one cares about them. They don't even try to save their own soldiers, their so-called heroes. Russia has been like this throughout its history, and it remains so. And now we have the biggest chance to stop them, the biggest. We haven't had such a chance, I think, for 100 years. If we miss it, we'll never get another chance like this again.
This is the only chance for the Chechens, for the Chechen people, to restore their statehood. Because the war will end not just with the victory of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, but with the complete collapse and defeat of the Russian Empire.
I don't need that Grozny city business center that Ramzan Kadyrov built for Gerard Depardieu or whoever. I don't need it. You see, I am prepared to live on a small piece of land, but as a free person, not as Kadyrov's slave.
Akhmed Kadyrov, a leading figure in the Chechen resistance movement during the First Chechen War, sided with Moscow's forces during the Second Chechen War. Kadyrov became president of Chechnya in 2003, only to be assassinated in Grozny 8 months later. His son, Ramzan Kadyrov, was named as his successor.
Why did they kill Kadyrov Sr., who supposedly supported the entry of Russian troops and came to head the republic? Later, he expressed ambitions to gain greater autonomy and become the full-fledged ruler of the Chechen Republic, controlling all its resources. They eliminated him and installed his kid, his offspring, who was willing to accept any terms as long as he was given power. I don't think Kadyrov Jr. was directly involved in his father's assassination, but he knew who killed him and how the decision was made. It's the absolute truth. He knows that the GRU eliminated his father. It was the GRU that killed Kadyrov Sr. But did Putin know? Did he not? Of course he knew. I'm 100% sure he knew. He gave the order.
Ahmed Kadyrov достойно и мужественно исполнял свой долг перед своим народом.
Just like the GRU, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the FSB, 3 agencies, were also involved in the assassination of Zelimkhan Yandarbiyev in Qatar.
Zelimkhan Yandarbiyev succeeded Dudayev as president of the unrecognized Chechen Republic of Ishkiria. He was assassinated in a car bombing in Qatar on February 13, 2004. 2 suspected Russian GRU agents were found guilty of the murder before being extradited back to Moscow, where they disappeared from public view.
Similarly, I believe the elimination of Kadyrov was also motivated by his actions during the First Chechen War, where he called for killing 150 Russians to end the history of the Russian Empire's war.
Призывал чеченцев убивать столько, сколько вы можете. Я не говорил 100, 150, 200, я говорю, сколько можете.
They never forgave him for that. The system considered Kadyrov's ambitions to be a betrayal, so they eliminated him. His son was more convenient, ruthless, cruel, uneducated, ready for anything. He was also motivated by Chechens apparently killing his father. That's how they presented it. They played on the idea that the Chechen resistance killed Kadyrov Sr. Under this guise, they have carried out and continue to carry out their actions to this day.
Как дела в республике? В республике у нас все очень неплохо.
Today, the system is working, the occupation regime is in place, and no matter what puppet leads it, it will function just like under Kadyrov today.
There's absolutely nothing behind Kadyrov. If he dies, or if he's killed, they'll just replace him with a Badyrov or a Dadyrov. Call him what you want. There will be no difference. As long as this criminal power is in the Kremlin, as long as the occupiers are on our land, absolutely nothing will change for us Chechens, for ordinary Chechens.
And in order to create this Kadyrov, Russia has spent billions and billions and billions and destroyed hundreds of thousands of lives, both Russian and Chechen.
Ваша фраза знаменитая «Откуда деньги, Рамзан?» Вы ответили «Аллах дает на восстановление Чечни».
Я и сейчас говорю «Аллах дает, хвала Аллаху».
They're the
mafia. They just took control of all the stalls, all the bazaars, the big stores. They divided everything among their cronies. People are dying in poverty. If it weren't for those Chechens who left earlier for Europe and sent money back, they wouldn't be surviving today. It would be even worse now. We are in the worst situation today. Ramzan Kadyrov is uneducated, stupid. You know, the kind of person Putin needs. A stupid man is always hungry for money and power.
Да, друзья подарили.
Ничего себе. Это бриллианты, наверное, да?
Ну, говорят, я не разбираюсь. Сельский парень, откуда я там?
He can't even speak Russian normally. Everyone calls him Don Donich.
Такие моменты, Дон, бывает, Дон, и везде, Дон.
He couldn't shake that habit. He still uses that filler word. The so-called president, the appointed one, you know? They covered him in medals like in North Korea, like Kim Jong-un. What are they doing this for? To counterbalance Dudayev? Dudayev was a hero of the Soviet Union, a general. He was a general. And they made Kadyrov a major general so that he's higher ranked. They want to deceive the people with this.
How can Russia lose this war? Today, by the way, it's August 6th, the day in 1996. Chechen troops defeated the Russian occupiers in Grozny, blocked all their military units and movements. So you don't have to look far for an example. We have an example of how Russia can lose. It'll end in their complete defeat on Ukrainian territory.
Today, I am ready to sacrifice my children for the sake of our common victory. I have an adult son, and I'm ready to sacrifice him today because I realize there is no future for my son while Putin is in power.
The Russian world is Bucha, it's Kankala, it's Samashki, it's Irpin, it's Grozny, it's Mariupol after the Russian siege. This is the Russian world and Russian culture. I really hope that there will not be a third Russian-Chechen war, for the reason that Russia's war will come to an end in Ukraine. That's what I want to believe in, and we have to do everything we can to make sure that the Russians end their war in Ukraine. When we spoke at the beginning about this being the Russian Empire's last war, I continue to stand by that position. This is the Russian Empire's last war.
The Insider's journalists continue their work despite pressure from the Russian authorities. You can support them by sharing this video and leaving a comment. If you'd like to further support their efforts, consider making a donation by clicking the link in the description below.